looking at me, that was it. John shifted to face Basil, crossing his right leg over his left. It's strange, yes, but dreams usually are, so why inform me of this particular one? You always have a reason. My dear friend, the reason I have told you is because I intend to write about her. My next adventure of a literary sort, he said this with a flourish of his hand. So I must not be disturbed for the rest of the day. And then Basil hopped out of the chair and left the room in a rush, excited for this new adventure to begin. You guys go ahead, I'm just going to wait right here by the exit, she decided not to add. All right, we'll try not to take too long. Lana smiled before running to catch up with Meredith, who was standing in front of some sideboard from the 1800s to the 1830s, for that was the theme of the room they ventured into. Hazel normally enjoyed museums, but today's trip to the Victorian Albert just wasn't working out for her. The by-era art and furniture filling the long rectangular room wasn't enough to distract her from the fact that her feet hurt and she hadn't eaten all day. Lana and Meredith hadn't quite made it to their side of the room. Hazel stood by the exit in her knee-length yellow dress and shifted her weight from one foot to the other, imagining it somehow made a difference. Her bag weighed down on her shoulder as if it were somehow heavier than most days, even though it carried the same sketchbook and pencils. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed some writing and turned to read it, hoping it would provide a distraction. It was a quote printed in gold cursive letters. Poetry demands a lot of courage. It is a lonely road to walk. Basil Hodgson. Are you familiar with Basil Hodgson? Hazel jumped at the unfamiliar voice. It was a security guard. She didn't realize security guards liked poetry. No, I don't believe I am. It's a shame they don't teach us stuff in school. He apparently hid too much of his work for enough to be published and remembered. Still, the man was smiling sadly to himself. He managed to get a mention in this place. I'll look him up. Hazel shuffled away from the sudden and awkward conversation over to her friends. Don't worry, we're almost done, Meredith said in a partially irritated and mostly joking tone. Hazel looked back at the quote on the other side of the room. Something about it resonated with her, the idea that courage was required for art. Hey, can we stop by a bookstore after lunch? John knocked and then entered the room without waiting for a response. Basil sat at his desk by a little window, and the feather peering over his shoulder danced furiously in time with the faint sound of scratching. John was glad he had chosen to enter the room without waiting for an invitation. If Basil had heard his knock, he didn't show it. After standing by the desk a few moments, John decided to speak up. Have you eaten today? It was several more moments before the feather slowed down and stopped. I did, I ate this morning. Then perhaps I should inform you that it is now morning once more. He paused to look at his friend. Had Basil really been writing all night? Have you had any more dreams since you first told me about it a fortnight ago? Basil shook his head slowly. No, I haven't, but I still see her. During waking hours, I keep getting these ideas, this inspiration, and I don't know where it's coming from. It doesn't at all feel like thoughts of my own. How could I have jumped over myself? He motioned to his work before dipping his pen in ink again. I've been trying to write it all down. John sighed at the sight of his disheveled friend. He needed to sleep, not write. I'll bring you some tea. He was almost out the door when he heard Basil's quiet voice. John, do you think she may be real? She had 1 hour before her brother Michael's train would arrive. On the table in front of her were a half-eaten sandwich and a half-read book. Making up her mind, she reached for the book. It took her 4 tries to find the complete works of Basil Hodgson. None of his work was in print anymore, so she had to go digging in used shops. Finally, she came across this copy from 1901. Despite how complete the title claimed it to be, the foreword revealed the actual situation. As the guard at the museum had mentioned, a good deal of Basil's work was never published and has not been seen since before his death in 1820. It is suspected that he either hid or destroyed what may have been his best work. Hazel spent the last 2 weeks working through the poetry. She was enjoying most of it, but none of it struck her quite like that quote in the museum. The ideas of the courage and isolation of poetry must have come to him later. She hadn't felt either of those things in her life until recently. She had other friends like Lana and Meredith who were artists, but their art didn't take up their lives as completely as hers did. She turned the page in the book and her breath stopped. On the right was a poem titled Hazel. It was silly, the feeling in her stomach. Her name was a common one. This was just another poem in the middle of a book of poems. Hazel. A grander room has never held such chill. A lone maiden stood in yellow dress, and dreams her mind conceives in color filled the canvas brightly with her brushed caress. Before this night I never dreamed the sort of bravery art is belief required, to stand beside it and refuse to thwart her own path so safety shall acquire. As loneliness is indeed the high price for courage we must all pay if we are to welcome with the face cast to our eyes. O Hazel, travel to the tree of heart. This courage I do not know as the heart and trust I know you breathe into your art. Could it be? Of course it couldn't, but she was a painter. She wore a yellow dress when she first saw the coat on the wall. The sounds of the train could be heard in the distance. Hazel slammed the book shut and shoved it and a half-eaten sandwich into her bag. The train slowed into the station and came to a stop. When the doors opened, she stood on her toes and tried to see through the crowd. Part of the difficulty of finding him was that he was so short, but he wore a red t-shirt this time. Michael! He looked up and politely shoved his way through the crowd to where she still stood on tiptoe. How's Scotland? You ask that every year, he smiled, and my answer's still the same. It's Scotland, and it's better than here. Before you ask, Brown's fine too. I finished it. Hazel, I'm working on dozens more, but the first one is done. That's wonderful, Basil, John exclaimed, more concerned and delighted as he received the draft. His eyes skimmed the paper. I can send you some notes up by this evening if you wish, he said without looking up. His gaze caught, he reread a few lines. I think you really may be onto something here. What are you reading? Michael stumbled into the little kitchen where Hazel sat at the table beneath a dim light. She blinked a couple of times and looked up at him. It's the complete works of Basil Hodgson. He was a poet in the 1800s. Since when do you read poetry? I read poetry. I'm reading some now. She looked at the book as an example. Very intently, too. What's going on, Hazel? I can tell something about it. She stared at him for a few moments and considered what she should do. Making up her mind, she reached into her right shirt pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, folded it into a neat square. I found this in the book. She unfolded the square and handed it to him. Now I'm trying to see if there are any other poems like it. Wait, isn't it sacrilege or something to rip out a page from a really old book? I felt like I needed to carry it around with me. You'll see why. His eyes scanned its content. Whoa, this sounds a lot like you. That's hilarious. It even has your name. Right, hilarious. She was staring at the floor. Hazel, you don't actually think, I don't know. I mean, it obviously isn't about me. It was written sometime during the summer of 1817. I just have this weird feeling, like somehow he knows me even though we obviously never met. Like some voice in the back of my mind keeps bringing up all these stories that support the idea, and I'm trying to tell the voice that they're just stories. This is life. There's no way that poem is about me. Hazel reminded herself to breathe and returned her sight to the floor. Well, while she waited for him to finish his sentence, hoping he could somehow help her, she found she couldn't look up at him. She didn't want to see what he thought of her. Finally, he continued speaking. Have you found anything else like it in the book? No. If that was the best you could come up with, a reiteration of what she was already trying, she was doomed. Maybe what you're looking for is somewhere else then. Maybe he never published it, so it isn't in the book. Missing word, she whispered. That was it. Assuming, hoping he hadn't destroyed it, then somewhere there was hidden the answer she sought. Somewhere there was definitive proof that this poem was or was not about her. Michael folded the poem up again and placed it on the table. In the morning, though, Hazel, you need to sleep. Michael wouldn't leave the kitchen until Hazel closed the book and went to bed. He might be her kid brother, but he knew how to play the part if possible of a sibling. Finally, she gave in and went upstairs. That night, she dreamt of a porcelain doll in a little yellow dress she had when she was little. The doll had a knob on the back that, when turned, played music. She dreamed of the times she used to dress up like the doll, sing its song, and imagine she was off on some great adventure. John was standing outside Basil's room for several minutes. He had knocked, but was still uncertain whether he should enter. Basil, are you all right? He was answered with the sound of shuffling papers. Finally, he took a breath and entered the room. His friend was shuffling several papers into a wooden box that looked large enough to hold 2 or 3 books. Basil, he asked again, are you all right? Basil didn't even turn around. Robert came by with some reviews. I thought you might like to read them. John tried to keep calm. He'd never seen his friend in such a state, running about and not even hearing him. Have you written anything new? Basil spun around and faced his friend. Hazel, are you ready? She nodded, and Michael paid the cab driver. She stood facing the house, her left hand holding her suitcase, her right hand over her shirt pocket. Her fingers curled around the edges of the poem through the fabric. She looked at her brother and then led the way up the stairs. The morning after finding her in the kitchen, Michael had discovered his place in an internet search. Poet's Bed and Breakfast, it was now called, but a long time ago it had been the home of Basil Hodgson. Hazel tried to convince Michael not to worry about it. She was afraid what the poem might lead to. What if it really was about her? How would a long-dead poet even know anything about her? She wasn't brave like the little girl in her dreams. Michael insisted that they go, his excuse being that they didn't travel together often enough since she grew up and moved to London. The path up the stairs was littered with red gold leaves that had been blown from the dark green grass by a chilly breeze. She didn't understand where the leaves and chill came from. Wasn't it still summer? The house was large and worn looking. It may have been white once, but now it was mostly fading brown. Hazel finally let go of her shirt pocket to open the front door. The inside was a warm contrast to the exterior. all soft brown woods and red furniture. Michael brushed past him to check the desk. He rang the little bell on the counter, and a woman with thick glasses and dark hair appeared. Hello, he said. I have a reservation. Michael set down her suitcase. Hazel set down her suitcase and wandered into the room museum. There were several old paintings and photos on the wall, a few pages of glass cases, and a little bookcase filled with old books. Hazel, she turned around to see Michael leaning on the door frame, only his face making use of the room. Our rooms are upstairs. Just a moment. Her fingers curled around the pocket again as she headed toward a painting on the wall on the far right side of the room. She wanted to only look at the painting to focus on the soft yet concentrated look on Basil's face, but her eyes drifted to the words next to it. Hodgson died at the young age of 29 from a stab wound assumed to have been received from a mugging that went wrong. He was not married at the time of his death and did not have any family. His friend John Moore inherited his few possessions. Moore later sold the house and moved to France. The house and the grounds were searched after the sale, but Hodgson's missing poetry was never discovered. The poem was no longer in her pocket, but clenched tightly in her hand as she moved to the opposite side of the room. Here was a section titled The Romance of Basil Hodgson. It briefly described two of his love affairs. At the end, it mentioned that while he was never seen publicly with anyone during the last 3 years of his life, there were several rumors that he was involved in a very secret relationship. Some suspected she was a married woman, others suspected his lover was a man. No one was certain of the truth. Hazel's hand loosened slightly around the poem as she faced her brother. In his house, it all feels so real. Of course it isn't real, Basil. How could she possibly be real? I have not simply invented her. At first I thought I had, but the things in my imagination, the things I've seen. Basil leaned back against the desk as he ran out of steam. Oh, Hazel, come here. Michael wrapped his arms around his older sister, unsure what to say. He felt it too, that somehow a poem had reached her through time. He had hoped that coming here would provide answers, a resolution. It still could. It's all real. Somehow he's so real to me. Her chest was heaving as she fought to control her breathing in the situation. He's also really dead. You may not believe me today, but know this. In 3 years, I will bleed to death in an alley in London. Then you will know I speak the truth. How can you possibly know the manner of your death? Because Hazel learned it. Her curiosity got the best of her. She had to discover as much as she could about you. She learned it, and now I have learned it. She is real. Hazel sat on her bed in her room at the bed and breakfast holding her sketchbook. She had been drawn with only the light of the moon floating in through the room's one small window. Sleep was doing its best to evade her. It was so easily chased away by the face of the man that now stared out the window with her drawing. The moonlight had caught an odd pattern on the bedpost. She leaned forward and saw a tiny etching of a tree. It looked as if someone had chiseled it out of boredom with a needle or a sharp pen. The tree looked familiar. She glanced out through the window and saw the large and living version of the tree that had been carved on the bedpost. It stood just outside the forest, a good 15 or more feet away from the others. Oh, Hazel, travel to the tree apart. She stood up from her bed, her feet guiding her out of the room and down the stairs. Was it the tree from the poem? Why would a man long dead want her to go to a tree? Of course, it was still impossible for the poem to be about her, but maybe it was fate for her to go to this tree. Maybe she just had to be brave enough to believe it. When she opened the front door, she pulled her sweater tighter around her in a vain attempt to protect herself from the strong winds. Her legs quickly became pulled under her skirt, yet she still chose to follow her feet, which were now leading her toward the woods. At last she came to a stop with a large tree. She knelt down beneath the tree and dug her hands into the earth. Pushing aside several clumps of grass and dirt, Hazel pulled up a medium-sized wooden box. After John had left, Basil sat down at his desk. His intention was to hide all the poetry he had ever written about Hazel. There was nothing he could do about that first poem. It already belonged to the world. But he could keep the world from finding the rest. Hazel was real. One day she will be born and she will know about him. But as she didn't even have a life yet, the world should have no claim to it. However, there was one thing missing from the box, and now was the time to write it. Hazel flipped open the latch and stared down at Basil's missing poetry. She picked up the first sheet of paper and began to read it with still only the moon for light. My dearest Hazel, I know that I will have been dead for over 200 years when you finally read this, yet it somehow feels as if we are conversing right this moment. We have never truly met, but I have grown to be extremely fond of you. I'm not certain as to how you've reached out to me, but every day I am gifted with the sound of your voice and the sight of your smile in my mind. I hope that you find the courage to believe that what I have written in this letter is true. In this box, I have placed the poems I wrote about you. I have no intention of publishing any of them. You may do with them as you wish. Keep them, publish them, they are yours now. I have one request I would like to make though. When Basil finished writing the letter, he placed it in the box and walked downstairs to the main room. Hazel walked back into the house, reading the letter in her right hand, holding the box in her left. There is a wall in the main room. Some of the wood grains curved into the unlikely shape of a large leaf. I've always found it amusing, and it would also be quite simple for you to find. Setting the letter down, Hazel followed its instructions and placed her hand over the leaf. On the other side of the wall, on the other side of 2.5 centuries, was Basil's hand. Forever yours, Basil. She didn't know how long she stood there, but eventually she removed her hand from the wall. Back in her room, she finished her drawing, adding herself to the picture. His gaze no longer at the window, but the drawing of her beside him. She replaced the poems inside the box with the picture and headed back outside. She reburied the box beneath the tree. As she patted the dirt, she bent down, her lips almost touching the soil, and whispered, "Goodbye, Basil."